Good morning. Again, I am Ed Hamrick, Assistant Attorney General, and I represent the State Board of Land Commissioners. Today is Thursday, July 15th, and the board has been in executive session to discuss a number of matters, in particular, the Cagine case filed in San Miguel District Court, and also to receive some attorney-client communication regarding open meetings law, CORA, and the meaning of non-simultaneous exchange under the. Sorry, you can pause one and then at the end of the sentence. Okay. And the meaning of non-simultaneous exchange under the land board's constitution and statute. It also, is that enough of a pause? The board also discussed valuation issues related to a potential non-simultaneous exchange in Los Animas County, that the premature disclosure of information might create an adverse advantage or disadvantage to the landlord in its transaction process. No decisions were made in executive session. And we are now back on the record and ready to proceed with the rest of this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ed. With that, I'd like to call to order the July 15, 2021 Board of State Land Commissioners. We did have an executive session earlier, as Assistant District Attorney Ed Hamrick mentioned. I also want to thank staff yesterday. We had a terrific tour of our property out in Arapahoe County, Lowry Ranch. Super informative day. I'm sharing with the new commissioners, this is such a learning board, which I really appreciate, even though that was my second time to visit the ranch. It was a whole different part of the ranch, and I always learned something really important and new. So thank you. I know that took a lot of work to put together. Much appreciated.
Welcome. Thank you for confidence, and thank you also to William Holston and his team, who did a really organized today and did a terrific job. So thanks to the staff and the team.
Agreed. With that, this is we'll start the business order of our meeting. But first, I want to ask if there's any public comment. I should mention this is our first in-person, if you will, hybrid meeting. So we're also conducting this on Zoom as well. As always, people are also welcome to call in, but we are working with new technology. So you can see we have a camera on the commission. We still have folks online dialing in via Zoom. So we're sort of working through all of this. And thank you to Nick and the team for helping to make this possible. One thing that we think is important is to include some sort of virtual option with our meetings, particularly for our lessees and people in the public who want to comment, who can't drive to Denver necessarily for that part of any of our board agendas. So I think we learned some things during the pandemic, and one of those is we were able to have reach and access to folks that might not otherwise hear from them. We're going to continue that going forward. So much appreciated, even though we're working this through.
Thank you. One quick comment. So we have converted from a practice session, which is what we use for executive session, to a full webinar. So we do have 21 guests that are listening in that aren't either displayed on the screen or in the room. So just let you know who's out there. And then it is our plan to have staff join us in the room, like as Chris did, to present their presentation. It'll take me a few clicks to get between this combination screen and the presentation again. So presenters, if you're listening out there and not in the room yet, give me a second, please. Switch things over, I'll appreciate it. Thank you.
I think we're doing well starting off this meeting. So again, our first order of business is any public comment related to anything, not related to anything as an agenda item. And I don't have anyone in the room, but Nick, I don't know if you can see anyone online who might be interested.
At this point, audience members, if you wanted to make, I'm sorry, I was paying attention to it, but I think what you asked was if anybody.
If there's
wanted to
anyone who
public
wants to
comment.
make public comments, 'cause I see that.
Public, if you were interested in making a public comment on something not related to the agenda, please use the raise hand feature and we'll call you to the floor to. Commissioner, I'm not seeing any at this point.
Terrific. All right, with that, we'll move forward. And our first order of business is Director Ryan. The announcements and the report that you have for us.
I've got three. Thank you. First, our fiscal year just ended a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to let the commissioners know that for the past fiscal year, the land board earned about 130 million in revenues. That meant that 65 million was distributed to the VEST program this year. And we spent some time during the commissioner orientation session on Tuesday talking about the impact of that money. VEST announced last week their list of grants for this fiscal year, and they gave out almost 300 million in grants to 41 school districts over the year. That means that over the 13 years of the VEST program, we've now distributed to them $860 million. They've leveraged that and gotten local matching funds, and they've now distributed about 2.5 billion in grants that hit 300 schools over the past 13 years. So I just want to remind everybody of the real tangible impact that our work in this room has on schools. And last year was no exception with 300 million in grants to do capital construction around the state. So just keeping you all aware of that. Second, two announcements about staff. The first, you already heard Ed Hamrick say that Eva Law, who has been a super assistant attorney general for us, there she is. Everybody keeps leaving her.
Yes.
Yeah. But Eva is going to leave the Attorney General's office and go into private practice. And we're very sad to lose her, but wish you all the best, both professionally and with your new family. So thank you for your years of service to Land Board. You've been terrific.
Thank you.
Second, another staff member who I don't see here, Stephanie Johnson, is retiring tomorrow. I think is her last day with the Land Board. She's been with us for 14 years, a member of our accounting and finance team, a terrific, super hard worker. Big shoes for us to fill with her retirement. But for those of you who knew Stephanie, she's also been a great member of the Land Board team, and we will miss her and wish her well in her retirement. So thank you to Stephanie. Stephanie, if you're listening, thank you very much. That's the end of my announcements, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Director Ryan? Perfect. We will move forward. We have the honor for our Department of Natural Resources report to have Executive Director Dan Gibbs. So welcome, Dan. Welcome to our first in-person meeting. It's perfect timing for you.
Congratulations, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you.
Where's your gavel? There it is.
Yeah, I'm gonna use it too. You know, people neglect the gavel too often.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see you all in person. Really congratulations, Philip, Aaron, and Scott, for your appointment by the governor. I know the governor is very excited to have you three participate in this. State Land Board is very, very important, and really appreciate all of your tremendous work. A few updates for me. It's as Bill mentioned, end of the fiscal year is kind of like a time that a lot of us in state government kind of look back at the past year and see, hey, what did we do? What did we perform? And so it's been a really historic year for the Department of Natural Resources, and in particular this past legislative season. It was just amazing to see some of the key bills that we worked on that passed, and want to kind of share with you a little bit on some of these initiatives that passed, but also what we're doing with the terrible drought season that we have right now, what we're doing for wildfire and fire mitigation, which is really exciting. So I'll try to be quick. I have a couple minutes, hopefully.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You're the big boss.
Okay.
As much time as you like.
Well, you know, this virtual format too is very important. Today we have Parks and Wildlife is meeting in Durango today and tomorrow, and that's a kind of a hybrid virtual format where you have about half the commissioners that are there in person, half are really all over the state. This is something that is going to be part of, I think, the new working normal. The governor is really interested in trying to look at workplace flex agreements that's in the staff have in place right now, where we feel strongly if you're able to work from home, we want to continue to allow that if you want to. In some situations that works well, in some situations it doesn't. If you work at Cherry Creek State Park and you're at the front gate, it's hard to do that remotely, right? And also certain, technical positions too. But we really want to look at almost using this new working normal to also help with the governor's goals on his greenhouse gas emission reduction too. So just imagine if we could not have thousands of people come right downtown Denver if they could work more remotely, especially on those days with poor air quality, like right now, frankly, that we want to do that and continue that. And so I think that's really exciting personally. But a few highlights for this past legislative session. We passed the Keep Colorado Wild bill. And so that's really a game changer in terms of how we deal with our state pass, parks pass system. So in the past, you go to a state park and normally it's a $10 fee, depending on the state park, it could be $11 or $9. And if you want a season pass, an annual pass, it's $80. Or if you have multiple vehicles and you want to have a transferable pass for all your different vehicles, it's a $120 pass. What this particular bill does is it dramatically decreases the cost of a state parks pass. We want to make sure that the cost of a pass and access to our state parks is not deterrent for people to visit. And so at a minimum, it'll be a 50% off. So we're going to start at like the $40 price point, but we'd like to get down to like $19 or $20 if possible. And this will be tied to your vehicle registration. So you will be automatically included in a new state parks pass. If you're someone that will never visit a state park, you can opt out. And we're going to make it crystal clear that folks can opt out. But with those revenues, we're hoping, so let's say we have a $20 pass, and we haven't totally decided what the price point will be quite yet. But at $20, we have over 5 million vehicles. And if we have 50% participation in the state, we'll generate $50 million. Right now, last year was a big year for us for parks. We brought in about $21 million of revenue, but average years are like 16 to 17. So you're probably asking yourself, okay, ideally we get to the 50 million mark. What are we going to do with that? Well, if you visited any of our state parks recently, it's busy to say the least. And we really want to look at expanding these state parks, in particular, looking at those areas that around the state are more economically challenged, areas that people want to see more folks. The perfect example is our newest state park in Trinidad, Fisher's Peak. I mean, the county commissioners, the mayor really rolled out the red carpet, to say the least. And it's a big part of that community. And as we work to expand those trails, it's just a wonderful, wonderful area to visit. So we also want to look at, other areas that are like St. Louis Valley and Northwest Colorado, Eastern Plains, to really look at where we can get people around the state that can actually, really help economically. So this bill also has a carve out not only for new state parks, but also recognizing with more people moving to the state of Colorado every year that we're seeing more search and rescue needs. And so we have about 4,000 search and rescue calls every year. And we have about 2,800 search and rescue volunteers. And seeing in our neck of the woods, Summit County is one of the busiest. Boulder County is also extremely busy too. But there's a funding mechanism too. There's a $2.5 million carve out for that. And there's also money that would be generated that could go towards our Colorado Avalanche Information Center needs too. And also we have an outdoor equity grant program too. And so there's money that would be generated towards that too. So the next bill is actually to create an outdoor equity grant program. So that's housed in the Department of Natural Resources within state parks. So it's a brand new grant program that's really unlike GOCO that really has to give money to like municipalities or counties. We can give money right to like, Latinos Outdoors, to Black Packers, to Next 100 Coalition, just to name a few different organizations that really work towards like outdoor equity. And super excited about that. We got about $1 million to kick that off, but in the future, we're going to average about $3 million moving forward to help fund that outdoor equity grant program. We also saw a bill to bring $20 million to the table to help with specific 12 state parks for capital needs. And so we're going to work on some of that. So that'll be included like expanding parking areas, camping grounds, and so forth. We also had a bill because this Keep Colorado Wild Pass, there's a couple year phase for implementing that. We're working closely with counties, in particular the clerk and recorders, that we're tying it into vehicle registration to make sure that what's called their drive system is really tuned in and will be able to handle everything. So we had a bill that is more or less, it was a $25 million bill to help kind of phase in, until the Keep Colorado Wild Pass is totally phased in. It will help deal with infrastructure needs, park staffing, wildlife and conservation needs as well. So that was a $25 million package. And then we had kind of like recovery for forest health and like water needs. So we had Senate Bill 54 brought $13 million to the table to help with a fir barn program. So it's kind of an iteration, Christine, of our old Colorado Forest Health Restoration Grant Program, but that's a matching program that the State Forest Service has, where people can apply for a grant to do defensible space and kind of forest thinning projects around their house and their community. So there's $6 million associated with that. And then we had another $4 million to deal with after fires. So a lot of people think like, fires are terrible during the fire, but also they're really challenging after the fire because the impacts to water quality and quantity. So we have money associated with helping that will go towards the Water Conservation Board's Watershed Restoration Grant Program. And then we also had $20 million that is going towards our Water Conservation Board to help implement the Colorado Water Plan, and a $5 million component of that to help with our basin roundtables. And really, to get good ideas off the ground, we really need to support this like regional. A lot of people are like, can't the state just like implement the water plan? Well, it really takes the local communities to come up with ideas that bubble up, and then the state can be of assistance. So that's really important too. But I want to just highlight probably the bill I think that's the most transformative for the Department of Natural Resources in terms of looking at the challenges we see in front of us with climate change, the fact that 1 in 2 Coloradans live within the wildland urban interface, the fact that we have a tremendously challenging drought situation in the state of Colorado, especially in Scott Braden's backyard, where the soil moisture content, and this, Phil, depending on where you're at in the state, you actually have to dig down 4 to 8 inches to get to that moisture content that you normally have just like 1 inch down. So that's very, very challenging for our farmers and ranchers, but it also, it's a key indicator too on what our forest health and wildfire challenges and outlook look like in the future. So we're doing things very differently. We are acting with the kind of urgency I've never seen us act ever before as a state. And so what we're doing is the governor sent a letter, and it was signed by our 2 US senators. It was also signed by the Speaker of the House and the Senate President, as well as the whole Colorado federal delegation. So on the more progressive side, you had Congresswoman Duguette, and more conservative side, you had Congressman Lamborn from Colorado Springs. So it was totally bipartisan. So this letter was sent to Secretary Vilsack, the head of USDA, and the Secretary Howland, head of Interior Department, urging them to enlist and bring in a Type 1 NEMO team, a National Incident Management Organization, which would normally be reserved for dealing with incidents while they're occurring. So you bring in a type 1 NEMO team for a Katrina situation, for a 9/11 situation, for really large scale fires. Historically, you don't bring them in on the front end, but they're like the Navy SEALs of planning for risks. And so we are actively working with them right now. And we've charged them with working with the Division of Fire Prevention and Control, working with the Department of Natural Resources, working with the Colorado State Forest Service, working with the Bureau of Land Management, working with the Bureau of Reclamation, with U.S. Forest Service, all of our state, federal, and our tribes, to really do some serious mapping, to look around the state to figure out, where are the most critical locations in the state that we really need to make an investment in. To number one, protect lives. Number two, protect homes. And number three, protect critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure, watersheds, reservoirs, power lines. And so, I would say in the past, and Scott, you know this very well from your work in conservation, I think there are times in the Forest Service, almost has this philosophy of like random acts restoration, where they have quotas from Washington, D.C. that come down, believe it or not, that say like, hey, you have to produce X amount of board feet. You have to cut down X amount of trees to meet your quota. It doesn't matter where they're at. It's kind of, it depends on like where they have approval, where NEPA and so forth have decided. But it's no tie-in to protecting lives, property, or critical infrastructure. It's insane. And so part of this mapping exercise, we are kind of like almost forcing our federal partners to look through a lens differently. And so we are working to figure out, pods around the state of Colorado where, for example, one pod clearly is the Evergreen area. We need to have some serious work there, but also pods that show, hey, if a fire burns in this area, let's let it burn. There's areas where fire can really play an important role in the ecology of our landscape. But also we need to put them out where we have to put them out. So once we're done with the mapping, we're adding capacity. So we're quadrupling the corrections crews right now that we have available for firefighting, which I also think is super exciting because it's a pipeline for people to have jobs professionally when they get out of prison. These are not folks that are, they're more or less minor offenses. So they're not like, you're not putting, I don't know, Supermax folks, out there in the field. And we are also working to also quadruple what we're doing for our conservation, our youth corps around the state of Colorado. And they also play a really important role in mitigation. We are hiring a couple new people within the Department of Natural Resources to help coordinate all this. And so my hope is that we'll have a preliminary map in the next couple months. We'll be able to work with local communities to figure out, hey, see on the map here, like, county commissioners, mayors, homeowners associations, whoever it may be, we need your help to get the local buy-in to get these projects off the ground. Some of these lands will be private lands, some of those will be federal, some will be tribal, and so it really does not matter because wildfires don't know the difference between federal, state, private, or tribal lands. So we're looking at a management strategy that would be game-changing, really. And so you can tell my excitement with this, but I feel like there's great urgency behind this. I'm really excited to be working on it. A couple other quick items before you give me the hook. Let's see, we also have a lot of different kind of internal and external stakeholder working groups. The legislature last year charged us with looking at how we can amp up and really strengthen our anti-water speculation laws in Colorado. And so we have a work group working on that. We also have a work group focused on the Colorado Geographic Naming Board. And so looking at renaming geological and natural features, mountain peaks and so forth that are very offensive, frankly, that we should have, some certain names that never should have been named. And so that will be an advisory group to the governor, and the governor then makes recommendations to the federal geographic naming group. I'm trying to think, we also have, we're kicking off our search and rescue advisory group too. And that's really looking through a lens, as I mentioned, we have 44,000 search and rescues a year. And this particular work group is really looking at what the needs of search and rescue are moving forward. And believe it or not, we haven't done that before. And it's kind of long overdue. So we are busy, to say the least, at the Department of Natural Resources. There's just a lot going on. I'm doing my best now that things seem to be kind of back to normal a little bit, getting around the state. I was down in Durango a couple of days ago for a fire commission meeting, and I'll be down in Trinidad later on this weekend, but just getting around the state, trying to visit folks I haven't been able to visit for a while. But again, I really appreciate your service to State Land Board. You all play a really important role in the Department of Natural Resources and for the state of Colorado. So I know you take this job very seriously. I wish I could pay you money like we pay the oil and gas conservation commissioners or public utilities, but I know you do really important work, and so thank you. Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions? Executive Director Gibbs?
So Dan, how will the search and rescue money be allocated? Will it go through the counties, or can you say more about that?
Yeah, right now, the search and rescue program, there's a Department of Local Affairs has it's really housed under them. So when you can buy the COSAR card, $3 annually, or for 2 years, $5, or when you buy a hunting and fishing license, there's a 25-cent surcharge on there. So that money that's generated goes more or less to Department of Local Affairs, and they have an advisory committee, and then search and rescue teams from around the state can apply, and they divvy out a couple $100,000 a year. Frankly, the need is immense, and so it doesn't really cut it. So this particular committee will be looking at, does it make sense to keep that within DOLA? Does it make sense to put it within the Department of Natural Resources, or put that into Department of Public Safety? Should we look at a higher surcharge? Should we look at general fund support? Should we, what do we need to support the teams?
Right.
And we just don't know any of that yet. So that's what this stakeholder means. And we haven't had our first meeting yet, so it'll get off the ground
Huge
sometime this summer.
volunteer
Oh,
commitment.
gosh. If people really recognize, I almost feel like, we have a multi-billion-dollar outdoor recreation industry in the state of Colorado. And I would argue that search and rescue teams almost make it possible for people to recreate, not to be reckless, but just know that there's almost something for them a little bit, And I do, as you know, wildland firefighting, and, we're not out, searching for people. Law enforcement do some of that too, but honestly, the technical skills that search and rescue teams, whether it's cars off the road, or getting people off Long's Peak, there's very few. It's really search and rescue teams that have that technical expertise, and these folks are painters, doctors, teachers, you name it, all different professions, and some folks retired, but they give everything to search and rescue, and we need to recognize their hard work and figure out what their needs are. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Commissioner Clark. And this could be a bigger conversation for another time. I was excited to hear about the legislation around kind of the state park passes. I wasn't aware of that, and I think that's wonderful. Just curious about, as more people have that automatic access, or expecting more people to actually have the passes. Knowing that there are some places that are already really busy, kind of what are the projections of people actually going and using it, and kind of how busy that could make the spaces, and how those additional dollars help with the maintenance with the populations actually taking advantage of it.
That's a great question. We really pride ourselves in Colorado. We were one of the few states out west that kept the state parks open the whole time during the pandemic. And we recognized right away that it was really important for folks, not only physical health, but mental health, to get outdoors. And we did see, a pretty big spike, and that's okay, and that helps the revenue and so forth. But we're also, with more people ideally paying into the system, we think that's a good thing, because it's going to help us expand our current capacity at current state parks, but also expand to create new state parks. So the governor, he's very ambitious, and he's charged me with saying, get some more state parks off the ground quickly. And so we're in the process of looking around the state and really figuring out where those right locations are. But already we have management challenges. And I think that's what you're getting at too, like for El Dorado Canyon State Park, for example, and Josie's backyard. You know, just a couple of years ago, we had 200,000 visitors a year. Now we have 500,000, just like
I
overnight.
was there 2 days ago and it's packed.
Yeah, yeah. And we're seeing that, you know, our busier state parks is Pueblo Lake State Park. We see 2.9 million visitors there now. Cherry Creek has 2 million, Chatfield has 1.7, 1.8. So we do already have state parks where we have a carrying capacity. And so over Memorial Day weekend, my family, we were camping out at Rifle Falls State Park, just north of Rifle on the west slope. And they were not allowing vehicles in until vehicles were heading out. And, you know, my staff were like, you sure you really want to be there? You know, that weekend can be busy. But I was like, yeah, I want to see the good, the bad, the ugly. But we have to do that now at Pueblo Lake State Park too. But we want to make sure that we have a management strategy that, you know, ideally, if it gets so challenging that there's a reservation system similar to what like Rocky Mountain National Park is doing right now. But yeah, we're going to explore all that. And we're also looking at the latest and greatest technology too, where instead of having like, I don't know if you have like a Parks Pass now, but like if you have one for your vehicle, you know, there's the hanging thing by your window or whatever those called, hanging tag, yeah. And so in the future, we want to look at just like reading your license plate. So you just, you know, head right through. And we assume that most Coloradans are going to buy into the system. If they don't, if they opt out, then they can still do a day use pass. But we really look at this as a way that we want, you know, there's a saying that, you know, not all Coloradans, you know, live in the mountains or live close to trails, you know, but natural resources lives within every Colorado. And I think that's very true, whether you're, you know, born and raised in Colorado or if you're brand new to the state. So we want to, this is an avenue that we feel like it's a way for everyone to buy into our system. So the state of Montana, this is modeled after the state of Montana, you know, pretty more conservative state than Colorado. There was actually a bill last year to change it from an opt-out system to an opt-in. And they right now have an 87% compliance rate. 87% of the people say we want in, you know, that don't opt out. And the reason is because they all value their park system. They recognize this is Montana. And so, you know, so that's why I kind of mentioned it's a paradigm shift. It's going to be years in the planning, but we're going to do a lot of PR effort. We're going to make sure people know the value of what this pass really brings, the value for outdoor equity, the value to help non-game species, the value to support search and rescue teams, the value to support Colorado Avalanche Information Center. So it's yeah, on the surface, you know, a $19, $20 pass. We want people to think, man, I'm getting a hell of a deal and I'm getting a lot out of it, you know. So yeah, pretty cool.
Dan,
Yeah, thank you.
and congratulations on a productive legislative session.
Yeah,
We got a lot of updates from your team and you knew how much was on your plate, so appreciate it.
yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Join us on a tour.
No, yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed
Yeah.
yesterday. But yeah, I'll definitely get out there. And when you start having meetings around the state too, I'd love to, you know, join as well, if it's all possible. So,
Thanks for your good work.
yeah, thanks. Thanks for your great service. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we are moving on to final action business items. And we are going to start with David Rodenberg, looking at what is in your packet, the right-of-way 2028 book, 28 partial assignment request for Moreto, or with Moreto.
Morning, Commissioners. Nice to see you all face to face. It's nice to meet the new commissioners yesterday. So glad to see you all. This is a little bit strange. I'm not used to wearing pants at my board meeting.
The whole thing's crazy for all of us.
Keep your control of trends.
So good morning, commissioners. For the record, David Rodenberg. I work, I'm the right-of-way manager for the State Land Board, among a few other things, but today I'm the right-of-way manager for this presentation. This final action item is to recommend that the board approve an assignment of a portion of a water pipeline right-of-way from Rangeview Metropolitan District to South Metro Wise Authority. Under normal, for the most part, this right-of-way could have been approved as assignment by staff. The key component of why we're here in front of you to get your decision on this is because of the term. Rather than a 30-year term, we're requesting a professional term. Also, I'm going to go through a few things here, but and so I don't forget things, I'm going to be reading a little bit, but feel free to interrupt at any point in time if you have any questions during the presentation. So if the board approves staff's recommendation for this assignment, the board will earn an above market rate consideration payment for an existing right-of-way on state trust land that when originally issued only earned less than $200. So the right-of-way is located here on what is known as Lowry Ranch in Arapahoe County. This is a more detailed map. This is the property, you guys probably recognize this, that you guys were out at yesterday touring around. And more specifically, this is the location of the solar panels stop that you guys were at, solar facilities, solar gardens. And this red line you see here is the portion of the right-of-way 2828 that staff is recommending an assignment of. The rest of these yellow lines are all related to right-of-way 2828 as well, water pipeline system.
You probably stood in that right away.
Absolutely.
Is that, you led that session, was that's exactly
Extension.
where
Yeah,
we
it's just on
started.
the other side of the road right there. Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, this is the property we toured yesterday, and this right-of-way portion was originally approved by staff in September of 2020, just last year, and then actually installed earlier this year. The right-of-way is approximately 3,900 feet long and 25 feet wide, and which equates to approximately 2.24 acres. So there are 4 key components related to this assignment request. The first being the Rangeview Metropolitan District. So Rangeview is a Title 32 quasi-municipal political subdivision in the state of Colorado that was formed in 1986. Rangeview was organized to develop water resources, water systems, wastewater collection, and treatment facilities for customers in its service area. The Rangeview pipeline system covers the majority of the Lowry Range. The second component is the 2014 amended and restated lease agreement between Rangeview and the State Land Board. The purpose of the 2014 ARL, is what I'll call it, provides Rangeview with the right to develop a certain ground and surface water resources associated with the ranch, and therefore allows for the request and use of water pipelines via a right-of-way process. Pertinent to this discussion, the lease also specifies the price that Rangeview will pay the State Land Board for rights-of-ways on the ranch. That pricing is significantly discounted from the charges listed in the agency's standard right-of-way pricing schedule. So in lieu of that pricing, however, the board receives regular royalty payments for the water that's extracted from the Lowry Range system, water pipeline system. So in addition, rights-of-ways issued under the lease utilize a specific contract form. While that form includes certain references to the lease, the 2014 ARL, the majority of the terms are consistent and with the agency's normal right-of-way contracts. So it's essentially the same contract with a few exceptions. Then finally, the State Land Board rights-of-ways are normally written for a term of no more than 30 years. The right-of-way form referenced above includes in part the following language. It's essentially a perpetual right-of-way, but this is what it states. The rights herein granted shall expire when the lease expires or otherwise terminates, but no later than May 1st, 2081. However, any right-of-way for the export of water, as that term is defined in the lease, the ARL, 2014 ARL, may continue for so long as and to the extent that rights to export water extend beyond 2081. So the right-of-way subject to this discussion accommodates a water pipeline that will be used at least in part for the purposes of conveying export water, and thus makes the application of the agency standard 30-year term somewhat impractical. The third component is right-of-way 2828, which was originally granted to Rangeview by the State Land Board in 1991. Since then, the original right-of-way has been amended several times to facilitate the construction of the new improvements by Rangeview allowed under the 2014 ARL agreement. This particular assignment request is only for that small portion that I highlighted in the previous slide of right-of-way 2828. So the fourth component is the assignee, the proposed assignee, the South Metro Wise Authority. They are a regional partnership that takes advantage of renewable water supplies from Denver and Aurora to help municipalities in the southern metropolitan area and to reduce their reliance on non-renewable groundwater. The South Metro Wise Authority consists of 10 Douglas and Arapahoe County entities that can receive their water. Rangeview is one of those 10 entities, which is why this partnership kind of makes sense. It's a very, very hard map to see, but this is essentially the infrastructure of the South Metro Wise Authority. All these different pipelines you see in different colors relate to different areas in their system. But this is the Lowry Range that you see and how it's integrated and connected into the the South Metro Wise Authority system. So this is the Lowry Ranch again, blown up in that area. You see the pipeline here, the solar facilities. The portion of the right-of-way subject to this assignment request accommodates a 16-inch water pipeline that was built by Rangeview earlier this year. The right-of-way for the pipeline was acquired under the 2014 ARL agreement for a one-time payment of $170. The pipeline is integrated into Rangeview's wholesale transmission facilities and used for both export and on-site water delivery. The term of the right-of-way is therefore effective for as long as Rangeview's rights to export water extend beyond 2081. Although Rangeview built the water pipeline, it was always intended to be turned over to the South Metro Wise Authority in order to facilitate the delivery of their water to a flow control vault that connects into Rangeview's main distribution system. I don't show that vault on this map, but if you look closely here, you'll see the pipeline coming down and that vault system is right here. So with that, however, State Land Board staff and Rangeview agree that an unrelated entity should not benefit from the specific terms of the 2014 ARL, specifically the discounted consideration charges and the longer term that's over 30 years. The parties also agree that the 16-inch water pipeline described above is an integral part of the Rangeview and South Metro Wise Authority water delivery system. And the State Land Board will benefit from approving the requested assignment as long as it is appropriately compensated for the use and the encumbrance and the additional term. The water pipeline subject to this discussion was originally reviewed and approved by staff when it was originally added as an amendment to the 2828. We didn't have any issues with the location and the use. In reviewing this request, staff does not have any concerns regarding the right-of-way and pipeline coming under control of the South Metro Wise Authority. However, the two issues to be addressed, I think I mentioned this several times, are simply how to calculate the charges and make sure we're compensated appropriately and to address the 30-year term. So with that, to accomplish the desired outcomes, staff proposes the following: a new non-exclusive right-of-way issued directly to South Metro Wise Authority on the same right-of-way form that is used for Rangeview rights-of-ways granted under the terms of the 2014 ARL. And this will ensure that all water infrastructure rights-of-ways on the ranch are in the same form and will simply simplify future administration. And not all pipelines related to Rangeview is what that I meant to say there. The consideration charge is proposed as follows. We calculated our standard rate, which is the $10,000 you see up there. And then there's an additional $15,000 to account for the perpetual portion of the right-of-way, with a total consideration payment of $25,000. Staff believes that the proposed consideration charge is reasonable because it includes the agency's standard rate pricing for a 30-year term and then charges an additional fee for the extended term. So there are three key benefits staff feels to this assignment. The State Land Board will be appropriately compensated for the use and the term. The water pipeline is already in place, so there will be no additional ground disturbance to state trust land. And the water pipeline is integral to Rangeview's operations under the 2014 amended and restated lease, and their participation in the WISE facilities is likely to result in the State Land Board being paid additional water sale royalties under the terms of that 2014 ARL. So with that, staff recommends that the board approve the assignment of a portion of right-of-way 2828, Book 28 from Rangeview Metropolitan District to South Metro Wise Authority under the terms discussed in this cover sheet. With that, I welcome board's questions and comments. We do have, I think there was going to be two people from Rangeview, but I think one of them had to leave. But Brent Rouliard with Rangeview is here to answer any questions specific to their entities. If you have any questions about that as well.
David, any questions or comments from the board?
Madam President, this is Commissioner Heath. I'm prepared to offer a motion in support of this, but at the same time, I would like to request staff that maybe at a future meeting, we could have an overview on water and include what our Rangeview obligations are under this lease in terms of that surrounding area, because it's a much bigger issue than just this right away. And I guess my question, regarding our water issues, I think could deserve a whole workshop maybe.
So, Commissioner Greg Oakers, Assistant Director, representatives of Rangeview offered to do that with us yesterday, but we felt it would take more time than we had available. So I very much agree with you. I think a deep dive on our water business and we could have Rangeview and perhaps a couple of other entities from us as guests to share what their plans are and how we work together in the next 2 or 3 months.
Any other questions or comments from the board before I ask if there's any public comment? We have no public in the audience per se. So Nick, do we have anyone online who would like to comment?
Just keeping an eye out for a minute because
Okay.
network sometimes is a little slow. And I've got Alicia Hawthorne from staff also helping me keep an eye on attendees and
Thank you.
answers. And she's in her office around the corner listening. But it does not look like we have anybody at this time.
Okay, with that, Commissioner Heath, would you like to offer a motion?
Madam President, I move the adoption of the this item after consideration of the materials presented and testimony given at our meeting today, July 15th, 2021, that board determines it's in best interest of the trust to approve the assignment of a portion of right-of-way 2828, Book 28 from Rangeview Metropolitan District to South Metro Wise Authority. The new right-of-way will include approximately 2.24 acres and have a perpetual term. The consideration charge for the right-of-way will be $25,000. And let me ask just clarification, this is a one-time. All right. And the board delegates authority to the director to draft an order and take appropriate action consistent with our decision today.
Thank you, Commissioner Heath. Do we have a second?
Second.
second by Commissioner Clark. With that, I will call a roll call vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Aye.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Braden.
Aye.
Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
And the chair votes yes, that motion passes 5-0. David, I believe you're still up with us.
Around for a minute, yeah.
And would I, for the discussion of the wind production lease with Panorama Wind, what I'd like to do is have us follow through on this action item and then take a short break. So plan accordingly. And with that, David, let's continue forward.
Good morning again, commissioners. David Rosenberg with the real estate section of State Land Board. This final action item is to recommend that the board approve a wind production lease with Panorama Wind LLC on up to 3 sections of state trust land in Weld County. I'm going to briefly go through our process, our 3 steps to leasing renewable energy. But because this is a production lease, all production leases come to the board. So that's why we're here in front of you today. So the proposed lease has the potential to help meet the State Land Board's renewable energy goals and Colorado's energy goals, and to potentially earn up to $4.5 million over the term of the lease. So Colorado has 300,000 megawatts of installed wind energy in the state, and the State Land Board has 210 megawatts of that 3,000 megawatts. The state of Colorado has a goal to be 100% renewable energy by 2040, and the State Land Board has a strategic plan goal to increase renewable energy leasing on state trust lands. Today, the state of Colorado is at 30% renewable energy, of which 7% of that is on state trust lands. So the process that staff goes through when a developer is interested in leasing on state trust land, the first step is the pre-application review. There's 3 different steps, and the first one is the pre-application review, where the developer, in this case Leeward, requested 5 parcels originally to be considered for a wind project. The parcels go through a line of business review to determine whether the staff believes the project is in the best interest of the state trust. Our lines of businesses include our oil and gas leasing manager, our recreational manager, our real estate group, our stewardship trust manager, our district manager, and our ecosystem services manager. So pretty much all of staff is involved in making a decision of whether this makes sense or not. Barring any issues, staff gives the developer the direction to submit a planning lease application. And at the same time, staff notifies our agricultural SC and communicates with them to solicit their input as to see if there's any issues or concerns with a particular project, this being the wind farm in this case. Second step is the planning lease stage. The second, we will issue a 3-year planning lease. The planning lease gives the developer enough site control to perform its site planning and determine if they can obtain an off-taker of the energy and obtain the necessary permits. The planning lease is generally approved by staff, except when agricultural lessees have issues or concerns that they want to bring to the board. In that case, we'll present it to the board to make a decision and hear staff's standpoint, as well as the ag lessees' concerns or issues. The last step is the long-term production lease. At this point in time, the project is proven to be viable, and the developer needs to obtain a production lease in order to move the project forward. Terms are negotiated by staff and then brought to the board to review and make a decision on. All renewable energy production leases require board approval, which is why we're here today. Any questions so far on the process? So this particular production lease request is located in Weld County, located approximately, well, you see where the arrow's pointing. It's about 15 miles east of Grover, if you all know where that's at. I didn't know where that's at, but it's just 15 miles west of the site. So Panorama Wind LLC is a wholly owned subsidiary of Leeward Renewable Energy Development. The board has 2 existing wind production leases with Leeward, and they are referred to as Mountain Breeze Wind Farm, which is located directly west and adjacent to this site. And the Cedar Creek Wind Farm, which is located directly south and adjacent to the Mountain Breeze project. I'll show you a map in a second that shows where those are located, just for reference purposes. Those 2 existing production leases produce a total of 472 megawatts, of which 31 megawatts are on state trust lands and produce an annual revenue of $144,000 a year. That's what it currently is, and it's continually escalating each year via a percentage escalator that's in the lease. Because the actual encumbered acres are minimal with wind farms, wind projects are very compatible with most other uses. Our agricultural lessee typically do not have issues with wind projects because they continue to utilize it for the majority of the land for their farming and ranching operations. Leeward has successfully collaborated with state land boards, agricultural lessees on these 2 projects so far, and we expect the same on the 3rd one if the board approves it. So hopefully you can see this. This red line that you see around here is the Panorama Wind Project, the one that we're talking about today, that includes these state trust land parcels. This green project up here is the Mountain Breeze Wind Project, and it's in production and producing, and includes this section of state trust land right here with 3 turbines. And then we have Cedar Creek, which has been in operation the longest, and it includes about 4 state trust land parcels, and it's this area right here. So all of these are Leeward, these 2 are producing, and this is the one that we're talking about today. So here's a close-up view of just the existing the planning lease, and this is the Panorama Wind Project that you see here. It includes 4 state trust land parcels. The original planning lease included this parcel, but it was removed from the planning lease with the Mountain Breeze project that the board approved in December, I believe, of 2019, so just a year or so ago. And so that was removed from the planning lease. So the blue you see here are just the parcels that remained in the planning lease for this next phase of the project. Lost my place a little bit here. So the total Panorama Wind Project area, as you saw from the red line, it consists of private and SLB land, which totals 20,000 acres, and will include up to 73 wind turbines, which will produce 145 megawatts of power capacity. This project, if in operation, could produce enough power to power 50 to 75,000 homes. So the proposed lease terms for the state trust land parcels would be a 30-year production lease plus a 12-month construction period. Will include up to 1,440 acres and will have up to 12 turbines on state trust land, which will produce up to 26.4 megawatts of power capacity. Regarding the 12 turbines, I just want to point out 6 of them are planned at a minimum, almost for sure. The other 6 are additional potential sites depending on final engineering and FAA approval from that Leeward is going after as we speak. They feel pretty confident that they'll be able to get that, so we expect to see close to the 12 turbines on state trust lands.
just have a quick question. Sure. On the 1,440 acres, even though they take a small footprint, that just encumbers all that, so we can never do wind turbines on that land again, or?
We can't do wind turbines exactly, but we can do other uses, yeah, outside of the footprint. So, so this slide shows you where the turbines are planned to be located. These semi-yellow dots you see are all of the private land turbines. I guess the more important ones that I want to show you are the 4 that are planned on this site and the 2 turbines that are planned on this site. This section is not going to be used and not be part of the lease, although as part of the plan makes it will drop off. And then this parcel down here are where the additional 6 proposed turbines are to be located. The state trust land represents approximately 16% of the total project, if the board approves the lease. So the total revenue produced by this lease over the 30-year term would be $4.5 million. That is made up from one-time payments, which consists of construction payment, installation bonus payments, road easement payment, and electrical collection line easement payments. Those are all due. That $71,200 would be due at the signing of the lease. And then the board would collect annual payments every year with a 2.5% escalator that ultimately will equal the $4.4 million over the term of the lease.
Director Chavez, sorry to say that last time in advance. On the total revenue, and I'm new with this part of these things, the total revenue, is that based on all 12 turbines being built?
Yes, yes, that's based on all 12, so it would be less than that, half that if 6 of them didn't come up. So to make sure the board is receiving the highest market rate based rent, the State Land Board has a most favored nation clause where the board will receive no less annual revenue per megawatt than any other participant in the project. In addition, the lease will contain a rent review adjustment every 5 years that's calculated based on either the current rent or 3% in year 5 of the gross revenue of the project. And then as you see on years 10 and 15, it would be 4% of gross revenue. In years 20 and 25, it'd be 5%. So the proposed wind project affects 2 agricultural lessees. Should the board approve the lease, these grazing lessees will be reduced. I'm sorry, these grazing leases will be reduced by an area equal to the footprint and buffer zones surrounding the turbines, as well as the access roads. Staff estimates the total area of the ag lease that will be reduced for the entire project that's on state trust land to be up to 1.5 acres related to the turbines, and then additional 9 acres related to the access roads. So the 2 lessees affected, Lazy D Grazing, their lease consists of 2,721 acres, and Wade Schumacher lease consists of 640 acres. So as you can see, it's a minimal amount compared to their overall lease. The agricultural lessees have been notified of the proposed wind energy production lease, and neither have expressed any concerns of the project. In fact, they were supportive of it. One of our agricultural lessees, one of the 2 that are affected, Wade Schumacher, is actually participating in the Panorama Wind project on his deeded private land. So this picture I wanted to show you, this is actually on state trust land, an existing wind farm, and you can see the minimal amount of footprint on the turbine once it's up and running. And then this is an access road, basically access each of the turbines on the property. So this lease also affects 2 mineral leases. The mineral lessee has not permitted any well sites on the properties. And Panorama Wind consulted with the oil and gas lessees, and the lessees did not raise any objections at this point. Staff believes that the wind project will not interfere with the future potential of oil and gas development. So Leeward has completed 95% of their project design. They have completed all of the required environmental studies, and they have completed their consultations with CPW on their project and received their input and implemented their suggestions. They also received their approved construction permits from Weld County as well. So the wind project has several key benefits. It will produce significant revenue for the state trust. The project supports the board's goals as well as Colorado's goals, and it's compatible with existing leases, which is very key. With that, staff recommends that the board approve a wind production lease to Panorama Wind LLC that is located on parts of 3 school trust sections in Weld County under the terms described in the cover sheet and more specifically described in the board order. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments the board have. And we also have John Witcherly, the project manager for this project. He's online if you have any specific questions about the project.
Questions?
Sure, yes, this is Commissioner Clark. So thank you very much for that presentation. And being new here, just wanted to ask a bit of background and context in terms of the planning lease itself and the relationship that we've had with Leeward and Panorama Wind. So if I'm looking at this correctly, that the planning lease started in June 2018. So none of us here actually were there to approve that in the first place. So I was just wanting to understand kind of what is the process of selecting someone for a planning lease like that in the first place? And then based on that, it seems that obviously staff is comfortable with this group and either for you or for the representative of Leeward as well. What is their other kind of track record in other areas with this type of development?
Sure. Well, we have the Cedar Creek Wind Farm was here before I came on board. So I'm not familiar with how that all went, other than everything seemed to have went smoothly and we had a good relationship with them enough that I was involved in the Mountain Breeze project, and they were great to work with. They're a big company, huge national company, and we just had really great work with them. They've worked really well with our lessees. So they've got a pretty good proven track record, and they pay their rents. So
Critically important.
Could you explain for a second when we use the planning lease and when it becomes production lease? I think that was part of it.
oh, sure.
Commissioner's question.
So yeah, so after we go through our pre-application review, so the first thing that happens, we don't necessarily select them as much as they select our sites, and then we sort of review them and who they are and the lands that they're interested in. So that all goes through our pre-application process with our internal staff. And as long as barring any issues or concerns, any major issues or concerns, we'll then reach out to our agricultural lessee to get their feedback on how it affects their operations, as well as give the developer the go ahead to submit a planning lease. So then they get that planning lease, and it's typically set up for a 3-year term, and that gives them some sort of site control to be able to plan the site, make sure they have an off-taker, whether it's with a utility or a private entity, and then get their permitting done. And so it's kind of a fine line between when that starts getting completed. In our planning lease, we have what we refer to as the 7C requirements. And it's a list of things that we need in order to negotiate a production lease. But there's no guarantee at that point at all. So we bring it to the board for approval.
I might add to that. It gives the operator site control, but doesn't permit them to build anything.
Exactly.
So they need to know they've got site control while they go through a planning and permitting process. But we want to learn everything that they learned during that process before we agree to this. So that's why it's a 2-step process.
And I appreciate that, and that, yeah, there is that work going on and building those relationships as you go. I just wanted to be clear that it's not like a competitive process that we've put out at the front end for here's land that we want people to be planning for.
Our solar or renewables businesses haven't worked that way historically.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Commissioner Graydon, I sounds like a great project. I appreciate the briefing, and when there's no more questions, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. I will check for public comment. Nick, Alicia, team.
I don't see any attendees who would like to participate or make a comment.
Thank you, Lisa.
Sure.
With that, Commissioner Braden, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. As Commissioner Braden, I'd like to make a motion as follows. After consideration of the materials presented, a testimony given at its regular meeting of July 15th, 2021, the board determines that it is in the best interest of the trust to approve a wind production lease with Panorama Wind LLC for a wind project located in parts of up to 3 school trust sections in Weld County. The lease will include a construction period of up to 12 months and a production period of 30 years under the terms described in this cover sheet. The board delegates authority to the director to draft an order and take appropriate action consistent with the board's decision.
Second. Motion moved by Commissioner Braden, second, Commissioner Chavez. With that, I'll call a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Braden.
Aye.
Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
The chair votes yes. That vote passes. That motion passes 5-0. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, with that, let's take a break till 10:30 and reconvene then. Thank you. Almost online. Now we have microphones. And again, I appreciate the team helping us work through how to do this hybrid meeting. So Crystal, we're going to get a bit of a process tutorial, which I think is both helpful for our new commissioners, but candidly, it's always good for all of us to kind of hear how you go about your work. So thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. Crystal Cranda, I'm the minerals director. And as Commissioner Scanlon said, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of our leasing process and see if you have any questions. And normally Katie would just jump right into her standard tract list. But today we'll start with this just to brief everyone. So the first statement, mineral leasing does not happen if sound stewardship is not ensured. This is a really important statement because when we came up with our leasing process, we wanted to make sure that stewardship was in the forefront and that this is what we were looking at when we came up with the process to determine whether or not to lease, because these lands are for our generation and for the future. So we really value stewardship here and took that into our practices. A little bit of history. We currently have about 1,000 oil and gas leases that are active. And in 2008, we started adding stipulations to the oil and gas leases that we issue. So stipulations you will see are different restrictions or requirements that we make the operators or lessees do before they drill. And at this time, about 60% are
or 60% of our leases do have stipulations on them. And in 2013, we started doing a review process where before leasing, we would look at the CNHP database. And what that stands for is the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. It is a large database with rare plant and animal species. So before leasing, we do a thorough review to make sure that there's no rare plant or animal species where they want to develop. And we also do a review process with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, CPW. So we have them comment on any biological concerns there may be on the area. And that started in 2013. And you will see in your packet, there is the full general stipulation. So any lease that comes out of our office now has a general stipulation on it. It's pretty robust, but what I want to point out is that we realize that what is on the ground today may be different at the time of drilling. So that general stipulation, if you look at it, it basically allows us at the time of drilling to impose additional restrictions and requirements. So it's pretty broad to say at the time of drilling, we may want to say, well, now you have to do timing restrictions, or now we don't want you to occupy the surface. And so it gives us that authority to impose those restrictions prior to drilling. So this slide is pointing out that we have 4 million mineral acres, but we only have 2.8 million surface acres. So you'll notice there's 1.2 million acres of severed estate. So that's where we own the minerals, but we do not own the surface above it. And what we find when we do own the surface, we can be very robust with our stipulations. We can require a lot and we can impose and enforce those restrictions. When we do not own the surface, we cannot always enforce and impose restrictions on a private landowner. And so what we've done to accommodate for that is we will make sure that any concerns are identified. If there was a biological concern or something, we make sure it's identified in the lease. And then we require that the operator use best management practices and meet with us to discuss those best management practices beforehand. So we just make sure that everyone is aware and practices does the best they can to avoid and mitigate those damages. That's the right word. Mitigate the situation. Impact. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. So this is our infographic of our entire leasing process. I printed it just in case people couldn't read up there. But I'm going to be separating these bubbles out and kind of talking about them one by one so you don't necessarily need to read it all, but I'll let you all get those. So the first two tracks up here, what we'll be talking about is, as I said, we have 4 million mineral acres. All of those acres are available for leasing. And so the first step in the process would be someone comes in to nominate lands that they think have good potential for oil and gas development. And so we received nominations, and first we would go through an internal review. So these first two steps kind of talk about our nominations and our review process. So the first step is an internal review, and that's where Katie Stitt, our oil and gas specialist, she's going to go through, are there existing leases and are they compatible? For instance, there may be an underground coal mine in an area, and we don't want to stick a wellbore down through an underground coal mine. There's certain leases or situations where they are not compatible, and we would not allow for oil and gas development on the property. So she reviews all the leases that are in place. And then we also do a review with our line of business managers. So we send out an email with all the nominations, and we check with commercial real estate. Is this in the path of development? Do we need to be aware of anything? Are we selling the land? We talk with our district managers to see what are concerns there on the ground. Are the soil conditions okay? Is this a suitable place for development? So we go to all of our different lines of business managers and make sure that it's a good place to lease. We then next do an external review. So this is where we contact third parties and we give them the opportunity to provide comments and to review the nominations. So as I mentioned before, we review the Colorado Natural Heritage Program database with the rare plant and animal species. We also contact Colorado Parks and Wildlife. provide them a list of every nomination, and they review and provide comment on biological concerns. We also review with Denver Water to make sure that there's no water concerns. And then we contact local government designees. So these are people that have self-designated and appointed themselves with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, or sister agency. And they've said, we want to know about all oil and gas development going on, so please contact us. A lot of these people are in the city planning departments or in the local planning departments. And we contact them to see, do you guys have any local concerns? And we give all of these parties 30 days to review the tracks and give us comments. And we then have this comment review meeting. So in this meeting, it's me, our oil and gas specialist, our stewardship trust manager, our conservation services manager, and our GIS manager. We sit down with all of the comments and we go through them to see, is leasing appropriate? And so in some situations, we may find Colorado Parks and Wildlife said that there is a eagle's nest and they don't want us to lease. And so we may go look, where is that eagle's nest? Do a 2-mile buffer and find that it only crosses a little tiny portion of our track. So we may go back and say, well, can we lease the rest of the portion? And if we don't lease that part, or we work with them and try to figure out, okay, can we find a way to protect what your interest is and still be able to move forward? So we kind of go back and forth. And in some situations, we find, no, it's not compatible, we can't lease. And we come up with different stipulations. So I think in your packet, you've seen Katie has big robust list of the stipulations. That came out of this meeting, and of course she comes up with those. So the next step of the process, this circle is kind of where we're at today, the board meeting, and our auction process are what these two bubbles are. So in this board meeting today, Katie will be presenting the track that has gone through that review process and has stipulations attached to it. And she will be recommending tracks that have made it through for approval for leasing. This is also an opportunity for the public to comment. So if they have any concerns, our information is public and they can come in and make comments. And if the tracks are approved, the next step would be going to auction. We use EnergyNet. It's kind of like an eBay. It's an online auction house for leases. All the bids do come in on the last second. It's fun to watch. The next step in the process is this line that I've circled. This is what happens if a lease is won at auction. Then they're issued, operator or lessee is issued a lease, and it's going to have those stipulations on it. And all the money that we get from a bonus, because if there's a market and people have to bid against each other, we're going to get a bonus for that lease. And then they're going to also have to pay rent annually. So they have to pay rent for the life of the lease as long as there's production. All of that money automatically goes to the schools. And what we have found in our research over all of the years, only 88% of our leases actually go into production. I mean, sorry, only 12%. That is a huge difference. Yes, only 12% of our leases actually go. I was reading the 88 as I said it. 12% of our leases actually go into production. 88% do not and are never developed. And we get the lease back and the land back, and there's been new development. And so this is kind of huge that we get money right off the bat for bonus and rent, and majority of the time our land is never constructed. So what happens if someone does want to develop? We're at this bottom part. And the thing I'd like to comment, if you take one thing away from this whole oil and gas leasing process and the chart, is that we aren't regulators. And second, we are not special. Just because we are the state land board and you get a lease with us does not mean that you don't have to follow any rules or that you get special privileges. You have to go through all the normal processes just like everyone else. So they have to go through and get their city and county permits. They have to go through the COGCC and do cooling orders, spacing orders, get all of their permits. And so they have, and in all those situations, there's also opportunity for public comment along the way. So if a operator gets through all of their processes, at the end, is when they would, if they get through all their processes at the end, they would go into production and all of the royalties that we receive go to the school trust. And so I think in the last fiscal year, we had for rent and royalties, it was around 81 million. And then in the year prior, we were at 109 million. So we are down about 20 million in the last year, but it is a significant source of revenue that comes from that 12% of leases that actually go into production. And some other just little protections that we have in place. We do have provisions in our lease that fine people if they don't comply with the stipulations. So if we have a bunch of stipulations that we put in a lease, timing restrictions or things, and they don't comply, there are fines. We collect bonds on top of what the COGCC collects. So the COGCC already has bonds and we collect on top of that. Typically, just to ensure that the reclamation is to our standard. We also have a well inspector, that's Steve. He goes out and inspects every well that's on a property and all of the abandoned wells. And he has a schedule where he's out there on site making sure they don't leave trash. And you'll see his inspection reports coming up next month. But I mean, the main issue we see is weeds, but he's out there all the time just making sure that they're taking care of the sites. And we also do lease audits. And so Katie has a rotating schedule where she randomly picks up 50 leases a year to just make sure, are they in compliance with every aspect of their lease? So she's looking at, are they paying rent and royalty correctly? And she also is looking, did they follow their stipulations? Did they drill appropriately? So we have a lot of protections in place just to make sure that they're compliant. So that's kind of a high-level overview of the process. I was seeing if anyone had any questions or about anything along the way.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Braden. Just sort of a question about public participation in the process. So a week prior to this public meeting, the board packet is prepared. And is that the first time that the public is sort of notified of what the lease tracks are and has, the preceding 10 days or whatever to prepare to participate in during this? Or are there other comment periods or public participation opportunities that I might not be aware of?
That is typically when the public would become aware. We have a lot of public people that are interested in state land board affairs that have asked to be on like a list, so they get notified when our packets come out. If I do anything specifically related with industry, I always send things out to COGA and try to get, it's the Colorado
Oil and Gas Association.
Oil and Gas Association. I don't know where my brain was going. So I reach out to COGA to see if they have any comments, but public specifically is usually at that.
Thank you for that.
Commissioner Braden, if I can add on to that answer just a little bit. This, by the way, it's Director Ryan for the speaker and people listening home. Yes, you are correct that the vast majority of the public would learn that we were considering leasing something a week in advance. Where the public tends to really get more engaged in the oil and gas leasing process is when the permitting process happens with the OGCC. The act of us just signing a lease with somebody is not really where the issue is. It's more at the permit process. And so I think it's safe to say we've seen far more public engagement at that point in the process, because that's where there's really going to be an issue. Again, as Crystal said, only 12% of our stuff ever gets drilled anyway. And so if you're a member of the public concerned about that, you might want to invest your energy at the point in time at which there was actually an actual project moving forward.
Commissioner Braden was, I could get a follow on and then Commissioner Chavez.
I do have a couple, but I'm happy to share if somebody wants to cut in. Yeah, this is Commissioner Braden. Do you, when you had mentioned earlier in your presentation, which was helpful and illuminating, thank you, that all 4 million acres of the mineral estate of state land board is available for leasing technically. When you're doing your review, do you look at consistency with management of additional public lands, whether it be, probably this doesn't apply to private, but like, do you look at what the stipulations and whether or not adjacent public lands managed by like the BLM or Forest Service, do you assess whether or not those lands are available for leasing when making that decision?
Typically that doesn't necessarily fall within our consideration. I mean, we're always evaluating the area to see if there's going to be a market, what kind of potential. But I'd be more concerned if there's a reason not. I mean, we're trying to find reasons not to lease, or why we should remove this from leasing.
Is the nature of your question more along the lines, if there's a federal prohibition on a tract next door to us, would we lease that would we lease ours on adjoining, or what were you thinking?
That's kind of my question. I mean, I'm happy to construct a hypothetical, like imagine an in-holding that we have within like a BLM wilderness study area. In that case.
Yeah, I mean, we do take into consideration, we have some different projects in certain biological areas, and yes, I mean, those concerns are taken into consideration, and usually CPW would be the organization that would comment on that, and they would notify us if we didn't know.
Just a thought, I would maybe modify Crystal's statement, because I think it sets the tone a little bit differently. Rather than say all our lands are available for leasing, I would say they're all available for nomination. Then we go through the process to decide if they're available for leasing. So there's a slight nuance there. I'm not trying to wordsmith it, but I do think it's an important distinction.
Director Chavez, or Commissioner, why, to the best of your knowledge, why are only 12% actually go into production? I mean, why are they just never produced? And then secondly, do we put those out, or will they go back to be nominated again?
Yes, they do get released again. So throughout the history, I mean, a lot of these checks we lease over and over again and get that bonus and rental income, and then keep getting it back and getting the opportunity to redo it. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think a lot of times companies want to lock up a lot of land and do exploration, and maybe they run out of finances or they can't get permitting. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen where then they have to let the leases go. And then it's an opportunity for someone new to come in or for them to lease it again. So I just think that's kind of the nature of the game. There may be, oh, we think that there's a play in this area, and we'll see all of a sudden that county leases up super fast, and then someone drills a well and it's a dry hole, and then everyone abandons their leases. So that kind of is just how the game works. And then new technology comes out and they say, oh, we couldn't access this before. Now we can. Before there was not horizontal drilling. And so a lot of our lands have been developed vertically, and now they're coming back and saying, oh, we can go redevelop all of that stuff that was already leased before, and we can drill it a whole different way. So
I think Crystal's right, because assistant director, to Crystal's point, it takes very little capital and time, a lot of land. It takes a lot of capital. And so I suspect for the first time about just the economics of the business, are that there's some advantages to having a large portfolio tied up, but when the rubber hits the road and you've got to spend $10 million on a well, that's a different level of decision.
Just, this is Commissioner Chavez again. Yesterday we toured the Lowry property, and there was a bonus, I believe, 137 million, more or less. So that's a pretty hefty bonus without putting anything in the ground, without doing anything.
yeah, that was the largest one that the land board has received. That's like our largest bonus to date. We had our second largest was a $60 million bonus.
I would say they had done, based on the information they had available, and we had some of the same information, there was a strong indication that there were good prospective resources there. To your point, though, they then spent the next 12 months doing seismic work and trying to perfect it. And I think you heard from the current operator, they then spent first 3 or 5 years at least, testing different drilling strategies, really proving that the resource could be extracted. So it was a big gamble. I just wanted to say that I think they did know something about it before they went into it.
I would just add to that, that's highly unusual, and it was because there was only one party that owned the entire surface and the entire mineral estate. Normally, there would be hundreds of parties that they're having to deal with. And so the benefit of having a huge block of land and only one other party to deal with is enormously valuable.
Commissioner, are you finished? Was that the end of your question? Okay, Commissioner Green.
This is Commissioner Braden. Thank you. I may know the answer to this, but I'm curious if the staff undertakes any climate analysis in the preparation of the lease tracks. And if there's any sort of, and maybe that comes later at the COGCC steps in permitting. And because I'm curious, and what's sort of behind this question is I'm thinking a lot and sort of wrestling with consistency with the state's climate goals.
I would say you're correct in that the COGCC and CDPHE are the people that really are the ones putting the regulations and restrictions on. I mean, technology is changing all the time, and they have been being more and more stringent. Now all operators are required to do green completions. They're no longer allowing flaring, and they are really looking at the climate change issues and putting those restrictions and regulations on. So it's not necessarily something that I look at when leasing, but we are.
I just want to say, no.
We don't.
Yeah. But we are.
And then the explanation comes in, but no, we do not.
Well, we're in constant communication with them and going, I mean, we go to all these lunch and learns that they offer, so we're kind of in the know of what they're doing.
Any other questions for Crystal? Thank you. Super helpful. Katie, who's been patiently awaiting in the back row.
Good questions. Good morning, commissioners. For the record, Katie Stitt, oil and gas specialist. It's fun to be back in person doing these. I will be doing our normal presentation. Normally, Crystal wouldn't have given the leasing review. A lot of the information about our process is in your cover sheets that you get in your board packet. And so this is our standard list for consideration for our August oil and gas lease option. This track list represents probably the most geographically diverse nomination set that we've had since May of 2020. And what's significant about that is that all the nominations that were gathered for the May 2020 auction were done pre-pandemic. So for nomination purposes, this may indicate that operator interest is growing more throughout the state rather than just a specific county or specific location. So going back to our last auction, I just wanted to give a brief recap because this kind of is the end part that gets reported in the staff report, but isn't necessarily something that is in the board meetings when we review how the auctions actually go. So we had 13 tracks on our auction in May. This was the first time since 2018 that we had an auction that brought in over $1 million for bonus revenue. So it's fairly significant for us. We had 21 bidders participate in our auction. They represent companies and folks interested from 6 different states. So it's pretty broad interest, not just local interests. Of those 13 tracks, 12 of them had been previously leased. And what basically happened is operators went through the process, could not get permitting or could not get their plans in place prior to the lease term ending. And rather than attempting to go on by getting 1-year extensions, they decided to release their leases. So we got the lease back. Now we have an opportunity to review those lands again and put them back out to auction for a new set of folks to come in and compete to get those leases. The 13th lease was held by wells that were plugged and abandoned by those operators. They closed up their vertical operations. There are parties interested in now coming back and developing those lands horizontally. So there is interest in that. There was interest in that 13th track. to develop again. But again, they could not develop them in timing coordination with closing up operations on their vertical well. So lots of stuff that goes on these parcels. It's very interesting, and I will try not to get too into the weeds. But all of these tracts that we leased again were reviewed under the new oil and gas wildlife rules that went into place with the commission. We did a second review with our staff, and all of those leases have updated stewardship stipulations, and all of them went out with general and specific stipulations in that process that Crystal reviewed. So it's pretty good auction turnout for us. For our August list, I mentioned that they were geographically diverse, and why is that so? So I thought I'd just kind of give a brief overview on how oil and gas kind of operates in Colorado from a nomination perspective. Colorado has several active oil and gas basins, and on this map, there are the areas that are in the yellow outlines. These are places where oil and gas is known to exist due to historic and present day exploration activity. These basins are all driven by geology, and the geology is different in all of these basins. So you'll see more activity in one basin than others. The way they develop these basins is different, and all of it is because of what is under the ground. I am going to be honest, I'm not a geologist, but all of these companies have lots of geologists that work for them. And so when you see a proposal in one basin that may involve vertical drilling versus a proposal in another basin that may involve horizontal drilling, there's usually a geological reason behind it. And we tend to get all that information in when they bring those projects to us to review. These basins can change over time. So as wells are drilled, that better dictates where the resources are and where the basins are. So at one time, the DJ Basin, which is our most active basin, we have most of our leasing active. Most of our leases are active in the DJ Basin in the northeast part of the state. This basin maybe went down into Douglas County. When you visited the Lowry yesterday, a lot of the reasons that our lease was successful back in 2012 is because they were starting to see that the further south they went, they were still having successful operations. So that's where you can see how some of the bonuses change over time and where interest changes over time. That said, while most of our leasing is in the DJ Basin, we have leases in a lot of these basins across the state where we own lands. It's pretty diverse. If we overlay these maps with our current nomination list, you'll see that we have, we'll see how the geology can impact where operators do nominate. So we have 23 tracts for your consideration today on the August list. They are located in Adams, Elbert, Los Animas, Lincoln, Routt, and Weld counties. So you'll see the reddish orangish dots, which represent the tracts. A lot of them are in your DJ Basin, but we have some that are outside of those basins. And as I mentioned, just because they're not in a basin doesn't mean oil and gas doesn't exist there. It just means it's more exploratory in nature. And so that any exploration that might happen there can help better outline where those resources are available. So for our August auction, all of the tracts would be offered at our standard 20% royalty rate. Our auctions run for 1 week. As Crystal mentioned, it is like eBay. You kind of watch them the whole week, and then like the day of, you'll start to see some interest, and then like 5 minutes before the tracts close, you'll see it. So it's running from Wednesday, August 11th, and it would close on Wednesday, August 18th. As we detailed in the cover sheet, we've reviewed all of these per our oil and gas development policy. And staff has developed recommendations on specific stipulations that were outlined in Exhibit 2 to your board packet. And all of these stipulations are recommendations that the board, I'm saying in general, has seen in the past. But since we have several new board members, I'd be happy to discuss any of the recommendations if you have questions on them, or if they were pretty clear in the board packet, whichever is best convenient for you. So with that, staff is recommending that the board approve the standard list for auction and lease The list consists of 23 tracts covering roughly 11,441 acres. And it would include all the stipulations that we provided in the packet on Exhibit 2. And for convenience and for our online audience, I included the board order text.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the board? That's because Crystal's tutorial was so good. Commissioner Brady, did you have a comment?
We do have a comment, but maybe can we do comments after we have a chance for
Now's
public
your
comment?
moment.
Now's my moment.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Ms. Commissioner Braden, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to be a no vote today on these oil and gas parcels. And with all due respect to the staff's carefully considered recommendation, the staff did a great job of vetting these tracks and presenting them to the board today. And I want to stress that my vote is not a reflection on your excellent work, but rather cast in a larger context. I do not believe that our reliance on oil and gas leasing and royalties is in the best long-term interest of our trust beneficiaries. It fails to meet the urgency of the moment because of the climate crisis. I believe it fails the twin tests of one, generating reasonable and consistent revenue over time, and two, protecting and enhancing the long-term productivity and sound stewardship of working trust lands. It is slowly failing the former as revenues decline over time and investors seek to divest fossil fuels. It fails the latter as the effects of climate change damage our lands through drought, fires, and extreme weather, and render them less productive despite our best efforts at their sound stewardship. And the efforts at stewardship at the State Land Board are the best I've ever seen anywhere, clearly evident yesterday on the tour of Lowry Ranch. I'm intending my no vote to send a signal that I think we as a State Land Board need to plan for how we are going to align and contribute to Colorado's greenhouse gas reduction goals. In addition to the goal of being carbon free by 2040, I don't think it makes a ton of sense in my mind to kind of go full speed with leasing until 2040 and then slam on the brakes. I believe the State Land Board needs a thoughtful and intentional plan to decarbonize our revenue streams and develop new ones. Sorry, this was going on for a minute, but I wanted to say these things. The State Land Board has generated $2 billion for schools over the past 10 years. That's a wonderful achievement by any measure. However, over the past 10 years, the amount of CO2 concentrated in the atmosphere has risen from about 390 parts per million in 2011 to 420 parts per million in 2021. And you may all recall that 350 parts per million is the recommended, what scientists have warned us not to exceed to avoid the worst catastrophic effects of climate change. So we know from science, we know from simple observation that climate change isn't this thing out in the distance that we're trying to avoid, but in fact, we're living in it already now. We're seeing an emerging Western water emergency this year. Farmers across the state are seeing their water disappear earlier and earlier each year and getting shut off. Wildfires from last year blew past the old record size of the Hayman fire 3 times in the season, drowning our state in smoke. Last week in my home in Grand Junction, we set a new record, as long as they've been keeping records of 107 degrees, hottest ever recorded there. So I just don't think it's in the long-term interest of our beneficiaries to ignore the disconnect between climate and our management choices. So I challenge us as a board and my fellow commissioners to chart a path for the State Land Board that both responds appropriately to the existential challenge posed by climate change and serves the interests of our beneficiaries and the stewardship of the incredible lands entrusted to us. I think through policies, entrepreneurial new lines of business, we can get there. I have that confidence, and that we can play as a State Land Board a powerful role in Colorado's response to the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I appreciate your comments and your perspective. I think you've hit the issue that this board grapples with a lot, which is how do we balance our dual missions of stewardship as well as revenue generation. And so I appreciate that. And I think we should always be looking forward. And we know we have a diminishing permanent trust issue as well. And that reliance on oil and gas is also part of that, future forecasting. So I would encourage us to look proactively and productively down the road. I'll now put my education hat on as the education representative on this commission. The dire need of public school funding and particularly best funding in terms of capital improvements in our state is a crisis. So we have a climate crisis and we have a public education funding crisis. And we have to remedy both. We have to remedy both. So I'm comfortable moving forward with this revenue stream until we can do better in a lot of the other areas as well. And this is a place we have some control of. And I respect, of course, your no vote, but I will be voting yes today. Commissioner Clark?
Thank you. This is Commissioner Clark, as just stated. And I want to just thank you for your thoughtfulness and for sharing that as well. And we've talked before about the kind of, there's revenue generation and stewardship and all that stewardship and short-term versus long-term. And I respect what you're saying, Christine, as well, in terms of we always have a lot of different competing needs, right? And we don't want to, I agree with everything you said, except that I will be supporting this and that what I propose is I would love to also, as we talk about workshops and things, have, a really strong dialogue on our fossil fuel portfolio versus renewable energy and how we're looking at that holistically on a policy level. With that being said, in making those types of decisions, the lawyer hat in me is like, well, people need notice of that as well and an understanding of how that's fitting. And what we're looking at in this particular vote right now is a process that currently exists and that people are expecting an auction to occur and things like that. And so I think it's appropriate, given that this is what our current practices are, to support this list and these nominations and that going forward, because that is a process that people are already in the process of versus kind of yanking it away. But do want to absolutely keep on the table the broader conversation because I think it is important and is kind of that other layer of our overall intergenerational stewardship and not thinking so much short, and it's not really short term, but it is about the educational needs, but also obviously who are we educating if no one's healthy and we don't have a place to live, then what is the point of the school? So, so really looking at that, but again, for those reasons, just in terms of kind of separating out what this particular ask is in the context of where we are today.
Any other comments from our board? All right, with that, Nick and Alicia, do we have any public comments relating to this agenda item?
Hi, Commissioner, this is Alicia, and I do not see any raised hands that folks want to make a comment.
Thank you, Alicia. All right, with that, we will need a motion.
I'm going to try the other form of motion. I move to approve the board order with respect to the oil and gas lease auction and the standard list for August 2021 as drafted.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Clark, second by Commissioner Chavez. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Chavez?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Braden?
No.
Commissioner Heath?
Aye.
And the chair votes yes, that motion passes 4-1. Thank you. I appreciate it. I
I
appreciate the
think it's
discussion.
really helpful that you produce those comments and, excuse me, this is Commissioner Heath. And I think Aaron has asked for something that I think is really important, and that is, what is this path that we want to be on in terms of where we're going with the resources that are there and the obligations we have. And we've talked about that a lot, and as we're all interested in alternatives to this revenue source, how do we proceed? And so I think we should keep this is an item that we look at on the agenda in terms of our long-term vision about where we want to go and how the short-term decisions that come before us fit into that. And I think, that's a really important conversation and is a thoughtful discussion that needs time. So it's probably more a workshop than it is a board meeting.
I'm seeing head nods with our board. I agree and I appreciate the conversation. Let's move on. We are now to Chris Smith, our real estate section manager, talking through the final action item on a non-simultaneous exchange in Los Animas.
Thank you, Commissioner Scanlon. I am Christopher Smith again. I'm the real estate section manager with the State Land Board. Nick is loading me up. Nick, I appreciate it. You've done an excellent job, not just today, but throughout COVID. You and your team sort of making this seamless. So I'm here today to recommend that the board approve a non-simultaneous exchange or a disposition of 640 acres of state trust land in northeast Los Animas County. So this non-simultaneous exchange will benefit the school trust by disposing of a remote, really kind of functionally stranded piece of state trust land at a price that exceeds fair market value. So the property is located in southeast Colorado. It's right on the border of Los Animas and Baca counties. Actually, let me back up. So this property is about 90 miles east of the town of Trinidad and about 45 miles southeast of La Junta and Rocky Ford area. It's in a fairly remote part of the state. It's probably 45 minutes to an hour from any services. The property is surrounded on 4 sides by the Wild Animal Sanctuary, which is also our lessee. Part of their land is here in green. They own a 9,000 acre ranch, kind of to the north, the south, and the east of this parcel. Our parcel is here in blue. It's a mile by mile square. And then we're bordered on the northwest by a private landowner and on the southeast by the BLM. The Wild Animal Sanctuary, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit organization. They rescue large exotic animals, cats, lions, tigers. In addition to this 9,000 acre ranch they have here in southeast Colorado, they also have an operation that's open to the public just south of Greeley. So the public can go and see a lot of these animals in their semi-natural habitat. The property, this 640 acre property that the board currently owns, is really kind of hilly terrain with small treed canyons throughout. There's some open meadows, as you can see, sort of in the bottom of this photograph. And then there's some rocky cap rocks on top of the hill here. The vegetation on the land is a lot of juniper pine, as you can kind of see sporadically throughout the middle of this photograph, as well as different types of grasses. There's blue grandma, which we saw yesterday. That's the eyelash grass. There's western wheat. There's also some cheat grasses. And then there's different types of cactuses here. There's the cholla and prickly pear cactus. You can see some here in the foreground. The property does not have any improvements, so it's not fenced. There's no water wells. It's not separated really in any way from any of the neighboring landowners. And then the property does not have any legal access to it. So the way that we get there, both for like a field inspection or most recently to go out there with our appraiser, is we contact the Wild Animal Sanctuary and we meet them at their headquarters. And then we go from there in one of their vehicles to get to our property. Wild Animal Sanctuary is somewhat new to this neck of the woods. They purchased this ranch in 2018, and that's when they took assignment of our lease at that time. So they're kind of new to this area. So the board has the ability to dispose of land. As we talked about earlier, the way we do it is through a non-simultaneous exchange. What this really means is when we dispose of it, we take the proceeds from that sale, we put it into an account, and then we can reinvest that in other types of real estate within 2 years. We can't invest in anything other than that, other than real estate with that funding. And then if we don't reinvest it, it would go to the permanent fund. So that's what this would be, is I'm recommending a non-simultaneous exchange. We don't sell often, but when we do, it's for only a couple different reasons. Those are that it could increase management efficiencies, or we may be receiving an offer that meaningfully exceeds fair market value. In this case, we believe it's both. As I mentioned, the parcel has no legal access. It's leased to the Wild Animal Sanctuary, and it's not separated by fencing from their operation. It's actually included as part of their operation through this lease. So because of that specific use, and that use is new as of 3 years ago, we believe that this parcel will, on an ongoing basis, be somewhat difficult to manage. So disposing of it makes some sense given that new use down there. Also, at the same time, Wild Animal Sanctuary reached out to us in early April, and they requested that we put this up for disposal, that we make it available. And they indicated that they would be bidding if we did that. That prompted us to sort of get an appraisal. They have offered us a dollar number. We discussed that number in executive session today, but we believe we will get an offer on this and that it will exceed fair market value. Wild Animal Sanctuary currently pays us $2.55 per acre per year for a total of about $1,600. So there's really a minimal impact on revenues, which we believe we could reinvest the proceeds from this. So from a school trust perspective, I think we could do better on revenues. So some other items are the board, as Crystal showed you, we own a lot more minerals than surface. The reason for this is we are prohibited from selling minerals. So even when we sell a piece of surface, we can't sell the minerals. So we would be, if the board approves this today, we'd be reserving the mineral estate. In addition to that, we'd reserve access through the surface that we're disposing of to that mineral estate. And in conversations with the Wild Animal Sanctuary, they've indicated that they would be willing to give us access to the disposed of surface through their adjacent fee land to reach those minerals if that came to fruition. This parcel is leased for oil and gas currently. I believe that they intend to explore for helium, but there's no infrastructure on that. We did get an appraisal. We received that on June 23rd. We've discussed that in executive session. If the board approves this today, we would go forward with our typical public notice process. By statute, we would, under part of that process by statute, we would be putting that in a local paper for 4 consecutive weeks. We have a bid deadline, and we open the bids at that point in time. And then lastly, staff has reviewed the potential fiscal impact of this disposal, and we believe there's no net fiscal impact on local schools. Really, that's because we don't believe there's going to be any change of use of this land. It's remote land. It's currently at its highest and best use. We don't think there's going to be any additional housing or anything that would add pressure to local schools. So with that, I recommend that that the board approve the disposal of 640 acres approximately of state trust land in northeast Los Animas County for a minimum bid of $1,000. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. $1,000. Sorry. $1,000 per acre for approximately 640 acres. Happy to answer any questions, and then, like everybody else, my next slide is a suggested language for a question.
Thank you. Commissioner Clark.
Here I am talking so much. Hi, Commissioner Clark. My question, and I apologize if it's in here and I'm missing it, it's just so the Wildlife Sanctuary was the one that kind of brought to our attention to put this up, but we do have to go through a public bidding process. So I'm just trying to understand, like, at the end of that, if there would be someone else that is bidding, what are the criteria for kind of ranking who we ultimately sell to? And also, And then is it that we sell that, but this lease is assigned to the new owner that's with the wildlife sanctuary?
Those are two great questions. In this case, I think if there was another bid, the most likely other bid would probably be the other adjacent landowner, just because we can't offer any access to this. So I guess it's theoretically possible somebody else could bid and take ownership to this, and then maybe try to perfect access. But I think that's unlikely. As far as how we would rank bidders, we've dealt with this in a couple of different ways. Certainly the financial part of the bid makes a lot of sense to look at, was one bidder higher than the other. But if we get two bids that are very close, we may look at their use, we may look at how it's going to conflict with adjacent uses and sort of the neighbors. At the same time, our lessee, because they have rights under Colorado Revised Statute 36(1-118), could match that bid. So we would, if they indicated a desire to do so, we hold a step auction for them to do that. In other cases where we've sold, say, commercial land, we haven't always taken the highest bid, and the board is not required to take the highest bid. In those cases, a lot of times we've looked at maybe other terms. So somebody may say, oh, I want 3 years to try to get entitlements on this land, versus somebody says, I want to buy it today. Those would make a big difference to us. Understanding who we actually think can make it to a closing table is important to us if we want to sell. And then I'd also like to sort of emphasize that even though the Wild Animal Sanctuary came to us with this, and that's oftentimes how somebody comes to us, we really review these from starting with the district manager, throughout all the different lines of business, including the assistant director and the director. And we don't take these decisions lightly. We kind of bring things saying, could we do better management wise? Could we do better stewardship wise? Could we do better financially? So.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure to understand and have on the record as well in terms of what is kind of built into the system. So it's not that, oh, this is the highest bid and that's what we do. And also just to understand the thought process and the other variables involved. I can imagine what those are, but wanted to hear that. So appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Chavez.
This is Commissioner Chavez. Just out of curiosity, are there actually wild animals running around now?
How wild are they?
So I have not been on this parcel. Our acquisitions and dispositions manager, Matt LaFontaine, was down there with the appraiser last month to review it, as well as our district manager's been there several times. As I understand it, they're not just running wild on all 9,000 acres. There's very large pins, I guess, for lack of a better term, that sort of try to mimic their natural habitat. I envision it as similar to the one, their operation south of Greeley, which I have been to, where these are bigger pins, but not just like you're on safari. So.
Thank you. All right.
I think that's a good question for you living.
Yeah. Do I need a electrify?
All right, with that, we'll move to any public comment.
Commissioner Scanlon, this is Alicia, and I have nobody that's asking to make a comment.
All right, thank you. All right, we are ready for a motion.
I move we approve the recommendation as described in the, well, it was before, as recommended by staff on the slide. And in our pack.
And a second.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Chavez, seconded by Commissioner Clark. Call a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Braden.
Aye.
Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
And the chair votes yes. That motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
And Chris, you're still with us.
I have.
Move on to our next agenda item, policy review of our renewable energy.
Right, well, thank you again, commissioners. Again, for the record, I'm Christopher Smith, the real estate section manager with the State Land Board. So I'm here to recommend that the board approve some proposed revisions to the renewable energy leasing policy This is policy 300-003.
Sorry, I need to interrupt for a second for technical issue. I think I might not be sharing this slide. And my team listening can confirm.
Alicia,
See the-
what's your slide set?
I'm listening and I have a blank screen on my end. That's better. But I don't have it. I don't have the slide deck yet. There you go. Perfect.
That part.
Thank you for giving grace.
Okay, again, Christopher Smith with the real estate section. Here today to recommend some proposed changes to the renewable energy leasing policy. We believe these proposed changes capture the results of all the recent discussions we've had with the board. I know we have 3 new commissioners, but over the course of the last 6 months, we've been in front of you to talk about renewable energy, specifically about solar energy leasing. And how that interacts with agriculture. And so this month, at the request of the board, I'm in front of you with some proposed policy changes to kind of put those into policy here. So the.
I'm messing with the controls. You're all still getting word. Presentation mode is not showing this time. Sorry.
No, that's
Appreciate your. Got it.
All right, nice job. My mouse works. Okay. So we believe that this policy will result in it'll minimize impacts on our highest, these policy changes will minimize the impacts on our highest quality agricultural lands. So renewable energy to us is a semi-new line of business. While we've had it for over 20 years, it's really ramped up in the last 7 or 8 years, and really more specifically in the last 3 or 4 years. But we first wrote this policy in March of 2014. We review policies every 3 years, so it was most recently updated about 11 months ago. So there's not a whole lot of changes today. And we will continue to review these policies every 3 years, barring any changes that we need to make in between that time frame. So you can, the exhibit 2 of your packet is the red line version going from the current policy to what I'm proposing to be the new policy. Please feel free to follow along with that, but I will also highlight the 5 or 6 changes we're recommending here on slides. So starting at the top, we're adding to the authority of this policy. We're adding strategic goal 2, which really addresses real property stewardship. We just think that this better aligns with the current strategic plan. It's not just financial, it's also stewardship of the land. And please stop me on any one of these if anyone has any questions. Section 1A1, we've added the definition of planning leases. We had a little bit of this conversation earlier during David's presentation, but we thought we'd add this in here as a definition and clarify that these leases are meant for a lessee, a solar lessee, to conduct research. They're not meant for them to develop the land. And in fact, the lease itself doesn't allow access to the land without a temporary access permit. So if they need to go on there with a surveyor, something like that, we coordinate that very closely with the agricultural lessee to try to minimize any impact on the agricultural lessee or other lessees during this planning lease process. So we've added this as a definition in the policy. Section 1A3 and 1A3A, we've made changes to the requirement. We've changed the requirement to make all reasonable efforts to review renewable leasing applications with the agricultural lessees and to solicit their comments. Previously, this said that we would send them written notice. So we felt, broadening that, making all reasonable efforts to try to meet the lessees where they want to be met. We're happy to go out there on site to walk the land, to in addition to sending letters, to give them phone calls, to try to solicit comments. Oftentimes we'll send out a letter and not hear back. And so we really want to start that. We really intend this to start a deeper conversation. Section 1B, we've added a section related to utility scale solar lease location considerations. This is kind of the meat of these changes today. This we hope captures all the discussions that we've had over the last several months. And specifically, we've added language to avoid, we're trying to direct solar lessees to the lands that we think are best suited for solar. So, for solar development, which includes the best for solar, but also lands that have lower forage production for agriculture. So we've added language to avoid lease land that's leased for dry land crop production and land designated in the stewardship trust, and directing solar developers towards lands that have solar resources that are within 5 miles of existing electrical infrastructure and that have low forage production.
I'm skimming this, but I thought that was supposed to say both irrigated and dry land. I'm trying to see if your slide is different from what's
Yes,
actually
let
written
me-
on policy.
I apologize.
This has irrigated on it.
Yeah.
It does, yeah, okay.
I apologize. That was a oversight on my slides here. And then section 3B, we've made a change to clarify that exclusivity of use refers only to other renewable energy leases. Commissioner Chavez, I think this addresses your comment to David earlier on that we want to make it exclusive to where we can't have another wind farm in the same parcel because that'll affect the flow of wind for the current lessee. But we do believe that some of these leases, especially wind, are compatible with uses like agriculture. So we wanted to just make that clarification in our policy. And then lastly, in section 4A, we've made it a change to clarify which type of leases the board authorizes staff to approve and which type the board approves. We're not changing these authorities. We're just clarifying them in the policy. So with that, I recommend the board approve the proposed modifications and revisions to the renewable energy leasing policy number 300-003 as outlined in the cover sheet and in the exhibits 2 and 3. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And then I can project a language up there.
Commissioner Drayton, I have one tiny technical thing I just noticed.
Sure.
And then overarching comment. Tiny technical thing is in 4A, it looks like you want to insert wind generation projects, but the W is crossed out.
I see exactly what you're
It's
talking about.
just in production.
Thank you for catching that.
And the general comment is just that these look like some really thoughtful changes that balances the need to move more towards renewables with some of the impacts on existing lessees that I've heard about. So appreciate you and your staff for keeping this policy relevant and helpful.
Thank you.
This is Commissioner Heath, and for my colleagues on the board, this came about with a discussion that our board had and a realization that some of these industrial level applications were coming into agricultural land that was really good quality. And it not only had impact on the land, but it had impact on the communities of folks who live there, because these are large installations and typically a 40-year lease. And so I'm really pleased that the action of staff went about this really quickly and coordinated with other governmental agencies to try to put together almost like a wildlife, plan where you would see migration patterns. In this case, a place where we would want to see solar. And of course, the ultimate determination on it is at the county, whether or not these will be approved. But we really felt if we could suggest some things to these large companies, it made more sense for the land and reflected our desire to really move more into renewables. So I really appreciate the speed with which you've developed this.
Thank you.
Mr. Chavez, yeah, I'm grateful for what you're doing. For whatever it's worth, near our farm in Arizona, there's massive solar facilities, thousands of acres, and they took out incredibly fertile farmland. And it's just like, really, there's desert everywhere, and they've, it's places that we, see as we're driving around out there, and it's so this is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see how that could happen with the financial aspect of solar. If you're even an irrigated farmer, it could be enticed to go to solar.
Yes.
I can tell.
This is actually just, I was trying to find it again, this, just a technical thing as well, which I keep bringing it in meetings, but it, just where it defines, oh gosh, where did it go? Authority and then accountability. Okay, so it's director, real estate section manager, and renewable energy program manager. In the red line, it said there was a comma and then equals. So I was like, does the real estate section manager equal the renewable energy program manager? I just wasn't.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying there. Yeah, so no, those are two different positions.
Okay, so I was just like a comma or an equals. I didn't think it was both supposed to be there.
Oh, you're saying, you're seeing the dash after the comma?
Oh, is it a
I
dash
think
and then a
that may be
line under
space
that?
that's a
Okay,
red
I
line
just
on the
wanted to make
space.
sure that, yes, thank you.
We'll look at that once we accept the red lines and make sure that.
And
it's
that's
not-
what I wanted to confirm as well. I assume that it's like we approve this, but then it will go through for technical edits, things like that before it's fully adopted. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? I took speed reading my freshman year of college, so I'm good on substance, terrible on detail. So I appreciate the rest of the board in your thoroughness with this. And I want to share my thanks. I mean, we really were kind of grappling with these issues, and I think you've given us good guidance that we were really asking for. So I really appreciate your work. All right, any public comment?
I'm seeing none, and Alicia's in the room.
So we'll have to rely on, okay. With that, I think we're ready for our motion.
This is Commissioner Heath, and I'd like to move adoption of the board order number 2021 as detailed in our packet.
Second, moved by Commissioner Heath, second from Commissioner Brady. With that, we'll have a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Brady.
Aye.
Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
And the chair votes yes, that motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Alicia, we have a person to associate with the voice from the speaker. And this is a final action for a different kind of board meeting agenda.
Yes. And so commissioners, hello, I'm Alicia Hawthorne. I'm the Transactions and Record Services Manager. I manage a team of 5, and our group is involved and responsible for setting up processes for all of the thousands of leases or lease actions. We call them the leasing activities. We talk about those as lease actions. There's many different things going on. So we are the records experts here at the State Land Board. And so policies and reporting out to the board and transparency to the public, that's really some charges that we have on our team. So it makes me tear up when I hear the processes and the policies that are happening. I can give you just a quick blink of policies. We'll talk a little bit more about policies at next month's meeting.
about 10 years ago, we probably had 30 policies in place that weren't really looked at. And so the board at the time, there was a big effort to go through and align our policies a little bit more and have a template so that we're consistent. We want to have consistency in our decision-making. And according to the line of business, there are provisions in policies that help staff with decision-making, or the board with decision-making. We want to be consistent as much as possible. So that's a little bit about what we do. We like to be nimble. So Chris pointed out that this last policy that you just voted on was reviewed about a year ago. Generally, we like to take a look at them every 3 years, but if something comes up, we certainly will put some work into it and present it to the board so that we are checking off some good boxes or being more efficient in our processing. And so Ed or Bill or Nick or Greg, if either one of you want to make a comment on policies, feel free to add.
Like policies.
I know you don't. I love that.
Alicia, thank you for the introduction. For the tape, this is Director Ryan. We use policy to give us some guardrails around where staff can act and what those terms and conditions need to be, and when we need to come to you all. But as I've said to our team here many times, staff policy should never be an excuse for using good judgment. And if we have deals that make sense that are outside of our policy, we should bring them to you. There will be occasions when that will happen, when it makes complete sense to do a longer lease term or the right of way you saw today. That was a long, mundane exercise, but it was important for the businesses that were involved in that, that you all see that and approve a longer term. And so that is sort of how we use policies. We try and set out the goals and objectives within each line of business, within each thing that we're trying to accomplish. And we measure that every 3 years. Alicia is rigorous about keeping us on track. You will see these every 36 months, if not sooner, so that we stay current and nimble and entrepreneurial and responsive to markets and responsive to the directions we're getting to you all. So I just wanted you to have that higher level context for what we're doing.
And seriously, I do like policies. I just like to give Alicia as well. They're very helpful and they're very thoughtfully put together to give staff very good guidance.
Any comments or questions from the board? Ed, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to amplify on the role of policies very briefly, but
And this is it, Tanner.
yes, thank you. So the decision-making authority is vested with you as commissioners, and you are allowed to delegate some level of that decision-making authority to staff. So this is, as Director Ryan phrased it, guardrails of what staff's delegated authority to make decisions in your stead. And so it's one of the phrases or images I like to describe is it's like a standardized test grade sheet with bubbles. If you put the grade sheet over, you can tell whether the answer is right or wrong. Those types of decisions that are fairly routine and come to you to the board fairly often, that can be delegated to staff to increase efficiency. That's what happens a lot through policy. And this moment of reviewing policies is not only to decide whether the bubble sheet looks right, but also for the commissioners to decide, are they comfortable with the overall concepts and the delegation authority, and try to keep those guardrails where everybody thinks it's appropriate. That's all.
Nick, we're relying solo on you for any public comment.
It's a dramatic pause.
It is.
I'm not seeing any others.
All right, thank you. Yeah, with that, that's for a motion.
Oh, tell you what,
Yes.
this is the board leasing agenda, and may I give a little bit of insight on how we bring leases and lease actions to the board. So the board leasing agenda, you'll pretty much have one of these in every month's board packet. It's the blue band. There are 3 different ways that the board, that staff brings leases or lease actions to the board. One would be the individual agenda items. And so you had a couple of those today. And those instances, they were outside of the guardrails, the right of way that was in perpetuity. That would be an example of having a staff member prepare a cover sheet and have a discussion with the board for you to make an approval or not of that lease action. The other way you would get leases or lease actions that come to you would be the board leasing agenda. And think of these leases or lease actions as a little bit outside of the guardrails, but it doesn't warrant 15 different cover sheets and bringing them to you. Efficiency wise, these come to you for approval. We don't do anything until we officially have your A-OK. And then the third way would be the green staff leasing report. These are staff delegated decisions that are within the guidelines that we can have staff help us. And there may be 100 of these a month. And so again, for transparency purposes, this is how we report out to the board. And this report is attached to the staff report that has more content of the things going on for the agency. So those are the 3 different ways. And we have a board leasing report or board leasing agenda to ask for the board to consider for approval for these different leases or lease actions that are presented to you. So I'll do my normal.
Yes, I skipped right over all.
For the record, that's okay. That's okay. For the record, Alicia Hawthorne with the Transactions and Record Services team. This is the July 2021 board leasing agenda. We have 8 items presenting to the board for consideration. 4 leases are competitive bids. One is an agriculture lease, and there are 3 recreation leases. We have 1 extension, which is the extension of a temporary access permit. This one goes outside of the 12 months that's written in policy. It's for 5 years, but it does make sense to issue a 5-year temporary access permit. So we're asking for you to consider that for approval. And then finally, we have 3 leases, 3, not 2, 3 leases. One is a commercial lease, one is a recreation lease, and then one is a right of way. So I will certainly ask any or answer any questions you may have. And I have a deeper bench strength behind me. Wow, we've that folks, if you have specific questions that I can't answer, they help me out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, so we're regrouped. Any questions or comment from the board?
One quick question.
Sure.
Commissioner Clark, on the temporary access permit, so if the policy is that it's 12 months and this is going to 5 years, just kind of how are we defining temporary at that point?
Fantastic question. So in the permits policy, we talk about permits as can be a very low impact to the use of the property. And so in this particular instance, it will improve our efficiencies in managing, not having to issue a temporary access permit once every 5 years. We can do it one time for 5 years. These folks are actually bringing out bowls of soapy water to capture bees for counting. They don't kill them, but it's for counting. They're walking in, they're not vehicling in. And so this is an instance where we are asking the board to consider a temporary access permit for 5 years because it helps us with efficiencies in managing the mechanism, the permit for this agency.
So did they have options for additional?
Well, we could
1
put them
year?
into a lease, and we talked about doing a ground lease, and that
If you noted, there's a $500 fee for this, and we spent that fee and 2 times more debating all the options.
Fair enough.
I think it's the best
Yeah.
solution for this one. It is unique. I don't think it's.
yeah, you normally won't see a lot of temporary access permits outside of the guidelines that are given to us in policy. Thank you. It's a good question.
Director Ryan.
Commissioner Clark, I want to call your attention to another one on here that might be near and dear to your heart, and that's a lease at one of our commercial real estate buildings, number 6. And so we've got a real estate policy that defines where staff can approve leases and not approve. This happens to be a lease for 10 years and 6 months. And we have permission to do that for 10 years. So you're seeing that lease because it's a significant portion of the building and it's a little bit longer encumbrance than the board has wanted to give staff without knowing about it. So again, you'll see a variety of things that flow through this.
It's always an interesting.
It is.
You see all of our, everything that we
Just
have.
outline little things.
And I think it's helpful to understand on this, and I don't know if it's a few adders, but where it is that this is policy, but this is coming through because this is
A little
what
different.
triggers it. Yeah, as being a little different.
And one item to note is that I believe all of our policies say, if there is a competitive bid that comes in, we bring that to the board to vote. We will give you the information. So you'll see a lot of competitive bids on agricultural leases or recreation leases. If there's a couple of interested parties, we follow policy to have the board weigh in.
Commissioner Chavez.
Yes, Commissioner Chavez, I just have one question on number 8 right away. And just out of curiosity, why this wasn't done on the original lease with them? It's just curious.
David.
This is where I call on the
David Rodenberg, the real estate section. Yeah, the reason for that is because the board has the option to not approve the production lease and approve the transmission line, or vice versa, or not approve either one. So we separated it for that reason. We thought about combining them, but they are truly 2 separate decisions. So that's why we kept them separate.
I have to ask for public comment real quick. I'm assuming, since I asked before, we still don't have any folks. So
Still don't have any desire.
now we're ready for a motion.
I move to approve the board leasing agenda for July 2021 as presented in the board order.
Need a second?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Clark, seconded by Commissioner Heath. With that, we'll call a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Brady. Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
And the chair votes yes, that motion passes 5-0. So the only thing we have left are minutes, and it was only me and Commissioner Heath. I had no issue with the minutes.
Nor do I.
All right, with that, let's, we will move the minutes forward as approved by acclamation. And now we're on to a final information item from Director Ryan.
Commissioners, again, in terms of providing you context, we break our meeting agenda into 3 portions, or 4 to include executive session. There are final action items where you are voting. There's information items where you've asked us to more formally bring you back something, but there isn't necessarily a vote associated with it. And then finally, there's a request for review. So occasionally we'll have, the most common occurrence would be 2 competing bidders for an agricultural lease. One of them doesn't like the decision that staff made, and so they're appealing that decision to you all as a board. So that's sort of how our agenda breaks down. What I'm doing now is in an information item, and we produce for you each month a report of just sort of goings on and notes from inside the organization. So you all can kind of keep track of items you might have voted on previously. You might say, well, whatever happened to that deal we voted on 3 months ago? This is a way for us to try and keep you current on those sorts of things. Kristen does a great job also of putting in here the monthly outreach and press hits and where our articles run and all that sort of stuff. So if there are ways you'd like us to present this to you differently as you get more comfortable in your jobs, let us know. And I typically ask if you've got questions about the items that were in here or anything that wasn't in here, and I'll hit a couple of highlights for you. the highlights this month on the financials, you will see that we earned 144 million this year. Nick's finalizing the books here. But from an operating revenue perspective, that's actually down about 18%. It's down 25 million bucks from last fiscal year. Just wanted to have you note that. Commissioner Heath, for you, we put in here that we hired the Mile High Youth Corps, and they did a great job. You heard that yesterday, but I know that's near and dear to your heart. So we want to keep you apprised of whenever we engage with those good folks. We hit a little bit about wildfires. We track that where that comes across us or where it gets close to us. We make sure we're in contact with our lessees who are impacted. Same with drought. We do issue drought rent credits and reductions. That typically takes the form of a lessee either coming to us and saying, I need to destock, or we go to them and say, we need to have you reduce the number of cattle on the parcel or get them off altogether, and we will give you a rent credit for that. Let's see, I talked about BEST already. Kristen's got a lot of great links through to our public media coverage. With that, maybe I'll just open it up to questions.
Not a question, but a comment. But, you know, the map, all the information that we get, you should look to our website and look at the different materials that are out there. And Kristen's done a phenomenal job of capturing everything for us so that we also know what's going on with the work of this staff. So thank you. Much appreciated. All right, any final questions, comments? Are you gonna stay on?
I would ask if we know sort of schedule for coming months.
Discuss that. Thank you. For our August meeting, will Commissioner Heath and Scanlon.
Yeah, I like
that.
Yeah.
We slowed down. We compared calendars with the 3 new commissioners, and it turns out the dates that we already scheduled for the rest of the year work for everyone with the exception of Commissioner Clark in October. And so I think the dates that we've already published, you should keep in your calendars. For August, that is the 11th and the 12th, and we will be going to Sterling, Colorado. Up there, we will have a workshop and tour day that the bulk of that day will be led by Nextera Energy. They are building one of their wind farms on us, and we're going to get to see the construction of that and have a discussion with them around renewable energy, both at the portfolio level for the land board and then specifically about the wind project that they're doing up there. There are a couple of other tour stops scheduled. So we've booked hotels for you for Tuesday night in Sterling, so we can start the day up there Wednesday. And then we will stay Wednesday night as well and have a board meeting Thursday morning. At this point, that agenda looks about the same size as today's. Looking for a lifeline. So as we sit here, it looks like 1 o'clock ending in Sterling.
Yeah. Okay.
September, we are tentatively scheduled to be down on our Chancellor Ranch property. So that means we'll stay in Trinidad. That's the closest civilization, I think. Is that fair? And again, that'll
We
be,
go down Wednesday, do you think, or
I think we would go down on Tuesday night.
Tuesday nights?
Yeah.
With one. Okay. And I talked to Barb, now that we know everyone's calendars, Barb's terrific about sending out calendar holds.
She'll populate your calendar. if
So
you'd
you
like.
will have that for you going forward. All right.
So that's the next couple of months. We talked about October.
October, I think we're gonna do the water deep dive, and that would be better, I think, here, so maybe we'll
That's fair enough.
stop traveling.
Well, I just want to extend my thanks to our new commissioners for agreeing to serve on this board. I think you'll find it personally incredibly rewarding, and the work is incredibly important. Thank you for our in-person hybrid meeting. I think we did great. So
you.
much appreciated to the staff and all the work that you all do to make these meetings happen. So with that, I think we're adjourned.
Well done.
Yay.
Thank you all.